Hello, and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas into what it means to live as a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Here's your host, Loren Richmond Jr.
Hey, and thanks for listening into the Future Christian Podcast. My name is Loren Richmond Jr., and I'm pleased to be joined by pastor, author, and speaker, Jay Bakker. Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Great to have you. Thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to talking to you today. So, Jay is the pastor and co-founder, right, of Revolution Church?
Yep. Yeah.
And have a pretty famous name, I guess, in some circles, right?
Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah. And before we I guess I'm kind of asking you to jump right into it, but if you don't mind, share a little bit about yourself and your story for those who aren't familiar with you and your background.
Well, I'll go back. I'll go from here to back. Right now I pastor a church called Revolution Church that I've pastored for, I've been a part of for 24, 25 years. Been pastoring it for probably 23. And we originally started out as a church that just reached out to hippies and skateboard kids and people we thought were kind of being marginalized by the church. And over time kind of grew and evolved into a church for a lot of people and all people, especially people who are wanting to think and have questions and a lot of doubts. So I've been doing that for a long time, but I grew up son of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, who ran the PTL Club and Heritage USA, which was in the 70s and 80s the biggest Christian television network in the world, and they had a satellite in space, and were on thousands, if not millions, of different television stations and all over the world. Heritage USA was not, I don't want to say it was a theme park, but it was probably going that way.
Yeah.
But it was definitely like a huge Christian retreat center. There was a water park, so I guess that could be a theme.
Yeah.
But my dad was trying to build a place that families could come and kids weren't bored sitting through
yes.
talks all day long and music, services. But it was a huge church and retreat center. It was Disneyland, Disney World, and Heritage USA in the 80s as far as the most visited, those type of things, most visited vacation spots. All over the world. I was raised with having to have bodyguards because people were threatening to kidnap me and take my life. Me and my sister both. And, grew up on the spotlight, grew up in front of the television, grew up in front of the world. And that was quite a strange thing, especially that's all I knew until about age 11. And what happened at 11 in 1987, there was a scandal that involved my dad and an affair, and other preachers came in saying they were going to help and ended up not helping and ended up taking over his church and kind of running it into the ground. And a couple years later, my father ended up doing 5 years in prison. And at the same time, this was all over the news. Yeah. Saturday Night Live skits, every late night show, the butt of every late night show joke, probably the example of every Sunday service of what not to do. It was a really tough road to go through, and a lot of shock for me at 11 to go from, being part of my parents' church that was also my school, where all my friends were, most of them were employed by my family in the ministry. And, everybody seemed to want to be on the couch to talk to my parents on their show, to being really despised by a lot of people, and really scapegoated in a way for every person who was hurt by Christianity, or every Christian who wanted to find an imperfect Christian. Because it wasn't just the Christians, the Christians weren't very supportive, but then there are also people outside of Christianity who were like, oh, see, we told you this is what these people were like.
Right.
So it was, in a way, I experienced scapegoating very early on in my life, and in the power of the media before social media. And it's funny because, I'm very left probably. And, so when I hear fake news, I always think of Trump, but at the same time, I know everything, that was printed about my parents, and there was always like little bits of truth here and there, and then just like guess and things like that. So it's kind of left me very jaded, towards the world, towards the media, towards the church. And it was a really rough journey. I, struggled with drug addiction, alcoholism, luckily nipped that in the bud pretty early on, but still self-destructive and then dealing with depression and things like that. But yeah, so that's kind of how I grew up. And of course started a church at a very young age. I was like 18 when we all started it together. And
wow.
And, I already felt like I lived 2 lifetimes at that point. So I guess I was ready to do it, but so it was, but looking back, I'm like, man, I can't believe that's what happened, but that's what happened. So.
Yeah. I don't know if you said the word, but I'm hearing the word trauma kind of in that story.
Yeah. There is a lot. I mean, life is full of trauma.
Yeah.
We all go through trauma. And I think the mistake we often make is we set up this kind of hierarchy of suffering.
Yeah.
And like, well, I've suffered more because of this, and this, I've suffered more for that. But I think we all go through different types of trauma. And if we are able to mold them in a productive way, we're able to empathize with others and sympathize with others.
Yeah.
And that's what I've tried to do, and not take, not run the idea of, well, my suffering was as bad as yours or not as bad as yours or anything like that, but try to connect with people through suffering. Because I think suffering is we're all suffering right now with COVID and with, all the things that are happening with the police and racism and just this, it just seems like everything is just kind of going apart and coming to the rising to the top. And we're obviously definitely, as American Christians, we're in a place that we've never, or as Americans period, we've been in a place that none of us have ever been in before, but the world's kind of going through this together. Yeah.
As we're recording this, it's August 27th. And I mean, I'm a big sports fan, and I was just noting like the NBA postponing games in the playoffs because of the shooting of Jacob Blake, right?
Yeah.
And I think I really appreciate kind of what you said about kind of trying to break away from that hierarchy of suffering. It kind of reminds me, you probably have been through many of these, of like middle school church camp where everybody gets around the fire pit and kind of shares their sob stories.
Yeah.
And especially with like younger kids, it's like, who can tell like the sorriest, saddest story?
I won a few of those, so yeah. No, but it's true. Or it's like when a prayer circle back like in the evangelical days, it was like, who could out pray each other? Who could say Father God more, or whatever, It was...
I don't know how you remember it, Jay, but growing up Baptist, it was like you ended a sentence on Lord God and you started it with Father.
Yeah.
In the prayer.
I would often count them.
Yeah.
Just to be like, this is driving me insane.
Yeah.
As a PK, you get jaded pretty quick from that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
I mean, I can especially remember watching people pray with like other pastors praying with my dad, and I would just be like, oh my gosh, these guys are just going for it,
What is it meant? This is a loaded question here, so forgive me, but name something if you can, like what looks differently for you now being a Christian than what it was in your past.
Oh, for gosh, everything.
Yeah.
I would say God, the devil, hell, heaven, theology, the Bible, community, the church. It's quite a bit, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
it was a journey over time. So these things, maybe deconstructed themselves. I honestly don't like the word deconstruction because I feel like theology is a natural deconstruction.
Oh,
and it should be.
Yeah.
And if it's not, and it's stale, and then there's not a lot of growth that takes place, no evolution.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, those things definitely happened over time.
Mm-hmm.
Just so nobody's listening going like, oh, when am I going to get the big change? It's like, no, it just kind of, lots of studying.
Yeah. Has there been a spiritual practice that you've developed or would recommend to others?
Not as much as some good therapy, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I went through this therapy a few years ago called DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy. And it really has allowed me to live my life and be less of a people pleaser and less afraid of confrontation. And those were things more in my personal life than in my public life. My public life, I was a little bit easier to be confrontive and to deal with those type of things for some reason.
Yeah.
Probably because I grew up so much in the public, but really got some great skills that are ways to deal with coping skills that are really productive, that aren't necessarily destructive, like rather than going on like eBay and spending $1,000 to feel better. Yeah. I can, allow thoughts to pass by or, not allowing suicide to be the out. A lot of times when you suffer from depression, you think, well, if things don't get better by this point, I'll just take my life, and you're like, so that'll give me some peace. And it does for a little while, but then realizing that, I actually tried to take my life and I'm very grateful that it didn't succeed. So that's something that's not very healthy and not great for anyone. So I've learned ways to kind of cope with those things, to deal with dark feelings, to process them well. So that's helped a lot. It's funny, you ask a pastor that and you think I'd have an answer that was inside the church. Spiritual practices for me are like, am I working on loving my neighbor better as myself? Am I thinking critically? Am I, in this day and age, everybody wants you to have an opinion really quick. Yes. And that's for me, it's a little bit dangerous when you don't have all the facts. Yeah. And but it can also seem like you're being silent on particular issues. Yeah, especially very difficult issues that we're going through right now. Yeah. But I think we have to have time to reflect and look on things as well as we go through them, and but also support those voices that are able to speak out right away too, if we're able to find people that are doing really great work. So that's those are just different things that I try to use in my own life that help me grow more. Studying, whether it be theology or philosophy or even listening critically to music and documentaries and films and things like that. So those are all important things to me.
What do you think, this is kind of off topic here, but why do you think like therapy has been so frowned upon in Christianity traditionally, especially in like evangelical fundamentalist Christianity? Yeah. I mean, in some ways I feel like it's being naive. And it's not seeing God through everything. It's seeing like it's the us and them mentality of seeing like, well, what we're doing is holy and right, and that's of the world, and not realizing that if God is infinite or the ground of being, then God is woven through all these things. And that kind of us and them mentality, I think, has really made it negative, and thinking like, oh, well, I would have to go to somebody else to help me with my problems and not God. And then they created Christian counseling, of course, because we always have to do something and put Christian on it. Yeah. And I found that often, unfortunately, the quality of Christian counseling, I'm not going to say it's always bad, but a lot of times it is not as good. So I think, and I think it's people who are really trying to be faithful. I don't think it was out of spite or anything. I think it's people who are just like, well, Jesus says he's going to heal us, so we should be healed by a prayer or by faith, not by works or not by this.
other person, but I think that's sad because then we end up not using all the tools that are provided for us and that are before us.
Yeah. I often think about that a lot in my family context, and I don't want to share too much for the sake of my family. This is not quite fair then, is it? I'm asking you to share about your family, but I'm not sharing about mine.
I know you gotta have boundaries. It's important.
Yeah.
I don't have many, but I've learned over time it's good to have a few private things in your life.
Yeah, but I think about I think about folks in my family, like their desire to be better in their relationships, yet conservative Christianity doesn't provide enough tools to do so. And
right.
Yeah, that's where, to me, I'm like, let's look beyond those Christian walls or even conservative Christian walls.
And mental health is kind of like looked upon strangely. I mean, it's better now than it has ever been, but it's still, and it's looked at as a very individualistic type of thing often. It's like, oh, it's about the person and not about the people, but it really is about the people. It's about, if I learn some things about myself, I'm going to be a better friend, a better partner, a better parent, a better speaker, a better communicator, a better person at my job. So it really is something that really affects the whole community for a human being. So I think it is sad. But I think the things that we see, like scandals with my dad and scandals with, preachers over time, that, there might've been some therapy, some people who probably could have helped these folks through some of this stuff and to see things more clearly and not allow them to be put up on pedestals.
Yeah.
It seems like some of the basic things of therapy allow you to realize these warning signals. And I think we could use more of it. So,
I mean, we literally saw that this week again, as we're recording, with Jerry Falwell Jr., right?
Yeah. You see somebody who's raised in this their whole life. And, I think, the biggest thing is just the hypocrisy of it is what I think we should be. If we're going to be like, this is what's being exposed, it's mostly the hypocrisy of the fact that, like, he wouldn't have been able to be a student of his own school that he was running.
Yeah.
The fact of what happened with him and his wife and the other stuff, to me, is like, that's not great stuff, but that's not what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on is that it's the hypocrisy there that I think makes us all disillusioned.
Yeah.
And is the problem. But there's someone who could probably have used more therapy, I mean, I was raised in a home of a televangelist and a pastor, and it was tough, but you live through it. But he was raised under Jerry Falwell as your dad must have been insane. And then to have nepotism in the church, which I always think is a bizarre thing. And I grew up in the Assemblies of God, so nepotism in the church was a huge thing. To pass down to family members and not the most qualified person, but the person who has your last name also adds a whole nother complex level to it. So, I mean, there's so many different factors there. And I do look at somebody when I've heard his interviews or him talk, that's like, sounds like someone who's just really tired and someone who may be abusing medication. I don't know, but someone who's tired and worn out and probably needs to be away. And maybe someone who's disillusioned. It's very easy when you grow up in faith and it becomes your job and it's also a mantle that you're picking up, to have a hard time realizing, to decipher what it is. Is this my faith? Is this my job? Is this my convictions? Is this how I make money? Is this, is this purpose? I don't even know, because I haven't had any other purpose, and I've been told my whole life this is my purpose, and what does this look like? And how does my morality work into this? And I think every individual has dark moments, and a lot of times for these bigger preachers, we get to focus in on their darkest moments that none of us would want exposed. And because I think we're all contradictions. We all hold contradiction within ourselves. So I think that's a heavy place. It's a heavy place. And so for me, you know, with truly trying to love someone who may not necessarily have been my enemy, but his father felt like my enemy at one time, trying to love them and show as much grace and try to understand and try to have some empathy towards them. But at the same time, understanding, like, you know, if you can't follow the rules that you're putting on everybody else, then there's an issue.
Now I'm kind of going off the rails here, but I want to stay on this
That's
topic.
fine.
This kind of, I feel like what we're talking around is like this celebrity pastor culture.
Yeah.
That's so prevalent in evangelicalism. So there's a two-part question, I guess, is like, what are your thoughts on it? You know, growing up, you know, the son of a celebrity pastor. And then, I mean, I don't want to toot your horn here, but I mean, you're kind of a celebrity and yourself. How have you avoided those same pitfalls that so often befall celebrity pastors?
Well, you know, there's something about, like, there's a difference, I think, between celebrity pastors now and, or gospel Hollywood, as I used to call it. And then, you know, it's like, I feel like people like Jimmy Swaggart, you know, he started out as kind of like a street preacher. And,
Jimmy Swaggart.
And I think of people like my dad, mom, who started off as children's pastors. And they were just kind of following capitalism and the American dream in a way of, like, how do I reach more people? How do I make this better? And you're always told you've got to reach more people for Jesus. You know, that's the goal.
Right.
And I think some of these guys just became celebrities because they had innovations. You know, they're like, well, let's use TV, just like everybody's using podcasts now and social media. You know, people act like it's like this big different thing. Like, I would never be a televangelist, but have you followed my podcast and got me up on, you know, and supported us on, what is that?
Patreon.
Got on our Patreon. Yeah. I mean, if you give certain money, you get something.
Find me on Podbean.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And then, you know, we'll give you some exclusive content. And you're like, well, what's that much different than the prayer cloth, you know?
Oh, this is great, Jay. This is great.
Yeah, so it's very similar. And I think that's what's funny, is that sometimes we don't even realize that we're living into the hypocrisy ourselves. And things are, I would never. And then they're like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
You know, so I think those guys all kind of just blew up. And my parents were not great business people. You know what I mean? They were just all of a sudden had millions of people watching them because they were like, oh, we'll buy a couple of video cameras and we'll be on this show and then we'll try to do this. And then it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I don't think the goal for someone like a Jerry Falwell or Jimmy Swaggart or Oral Roberts or all those people were like, I'm going to be a famous person one day.
Yeah.
You know, and now I think there are a lot of people who are my age and younger are able to be like, oh, I can become successful doing this.
Right.
You know, it's not necessarily just like, I can reach more people this way. It's like, oh, I can make a really good living doing this and be well known. And so I think the dynamic has changed a little bit to the goal all of a sudden becoming fame rather than the goal becoming how many people can I reach.
Yeah.
So I think the goal has changed a little bit. And
I guess we could say, like, like your parents, certainly Jerry Falwell, and this, like, as far as like starting like a Christian university, not just a Bible college. Like, they were kind of, like you'd say, early adapters, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were all this they were doing, starting private schools and like tiny colleges. And then more people started to come. Right. You know what I mean? It just, these things, they evolved into these huge mega churches and these masses, you know, and now it's like, you can have someone like Rob Bell come along and he doesn't have to start off as like a youth pastor and a puppet pastor or whatever. He just starts off, and then in a few months he's got a mega church, right? You know, and I think did that because he's just a phenomenal communicator. Right, so I don't have anything against Rob Bell at all, but but you know, so it just, everything changed, you know, then mega churches became this normal thing. And now you kind of see people who are just know what they're doing and they become these huge mega pastors. And not that everybody's out for fame or not. But I definitely think if you kind of watch people, you can kind of get a feeling for, you know, where they're at.
Yeah.
You know, and so, I mean, these guys make a a killing on it, you know, and, you know, I mean, you had the preachers and sneakers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've avoided it probably by making big stands, you know, and by saying things that aren't popular.
Yeah.
And not willing to always give in to buzz moments, you know. Do I want to write books and sell books and do things like that? Yeah, of course I do. You know, I mean, that I want to tell people about what I'm thinking, and I feel lucky to have been able to do things like that, and that people care about what I have to say, and that I am able to encourage people. You know, would I like to be able to make a comfortable living at what I do? Yeah. You know, I mean, right now I have a co-pastor in training, and, you know, he's completely volunteers and makes pizzas every day. And I'm barely, you know, making ends meet, you know? So, I mean, that's also the reality. So just having a few books and having podcasts and stuff too, don't equal money either.
Millions.
Yeah. So
it's funny.
I don't know. It's a strange world.
It's funny you mentioned preachers and sneakers. I'll look at that on Instagram and kind of do the math of their outfits. I'm like, that's about my, you know, add that up with 52 weeks. That's my salary. So
yeah, no, I mean, I it's funny. I think we all do that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of have this weird kind of mixed emotions about preachers and sneakers, you know, because I see it and go like, you know, in one way it's like, I look at it and go like, oh, this is a way for me to feel better about myself and judge people who are more successful at doing what I do. You know, and otherwise I'm like, you know, these are human beings who, you know, I don't know what's going on in their lives. I don't know what the lack is in their life. I don't know what having a pair of, you know,
Yeezys,
Kanye West sneaker shoes is doing to make them feel complete and whole. You know, I'm lucky that I grew up.
Better attitude than me, Jay.
Well, I mean, I grew up punk rock, so like for me, having a pair of Dickies makes me feel cool. You know what I mean? So I'm like, I'm just lucky enough to be like, I like cheap shit because that's, you know, the community that I'm in. You know what I mean? I'm not in a community. I know I'm not a sneakerhead, but I very well could have been.
Yeah. Folks on the pod cannot see this. Jay is literally wearing a Dickies hat right now.
Oh yeah, that's right. And I've had this thing for over 20 years.
That's a good hat.
Yeah, quality hat.
Yep.
So, you know, if I had $1 million, I'd drive probably a better car and have you know, maybe a nicer apartment. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I would go much nicer because I'm kind of that Henry Rollins mindset of like, this could all end tomorrow type of thing. Yeah. So I just want to be like to have enough to just live because I'm just comfortable being in my own place and going to a coffee shop, and I don't feel like I require that much. And I'm running out of room for tattoos. So yeah, maybe I'll have a lot more jewelry or like a lot more silver. Yeah, I don't know.
Jay's showing me his jewelry and his tattoos on his hands. We need to have this a video podcast here, but yeah, it makes me think too of like, again, when the preachers and sneakers, something I've noticed, and I'm curious your thoughts on this too, kind of this, I'm noticing this kind of like Christianity is like my faith is represented by like the clothes, my status. Like Christianity is like a status symbol. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely been that in the past. I think as it continues to be so split, that it, you know, and so diverse now that it's not as much of a status symbol as it used to be.
Yeah.
Because you have a lot of progressive Christians out there speaking, and you have a lot of conservative Christians out there speaking and saying very different things, and unfortunately judging each other on like who's the real Christian or not.
Yeah, that's good.
To me, that's a game I don't care to be in.
Yeah.
I can tell you who I think has shit theology.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to, you know, try to judge somebody's salvation based on who they voted for or you know, what they're teaching. So yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, you know, too, like I've known some of the guys that have been on Preachers and Sneakers and like met with some of them and talked to some of them, you know, and And, and some of them I'm like, ugh, and then other ones I've been like, I know this guy, like if you asked him for his tennis shoes right now, he would take them off his feet and give them to you.
Wow.
And I just know that this is the type of culture that he grew up in. And this is a form of him fulfilling something in their life. And I also know he has a congregation of like 10,000.
Yeah.
And I know he's putting in a ton of work during the week. And I know he's freaking a talented pastor, a talented communicator. And, and works just as hard as anybody else, and happens to be successful at it. If I was the owner of the church, and like the Pope of evangelicalism, maybe I would be like, all right, we're going to have a cap on what everybody can make. I'd be like the communist leader of the church.
Hey, now I don't have to ask you that question later on.
Okay. Yeah, it's true. That was a question. I peeked.
No, that's great.
But no, I mean, that's the idea, that idea of like, maybe we don't need to have that much money, maybe it could be on a sliding scale. Like if you're a pastor in New York, you're on this sliding scale. If you're a pastor in Iowa, you're on this sliding scale. Which I think there's only so much you need to live. And not realize, I don't know if some of those pastors realize that there's other pastors like me and yourself who see that and look at a pair of shoes and a jacket and something and go like, oh man, that's 2 months of my rent. Like, do you think, because part of me wants to be like, could I just write them a letter and be like, hey, could you, instead of buying sneakers next month, pay my rent?
Yeah.
Or, or
just
give that money to other churches that are trying to do stuff.
Or just give me those old sneakers, then I can sell them. Right?
Yeah, I'll sell them. Could you sign them and then I'll sell them? That's great. It's like, could you just send us a new computer or, new sound equipment or, pay my co-pastor or, I mean, but I think if you take it for face value and you have a laugh at it, it's great. I think it becomes kind of weird when we sit there and we're sitting on our judgment seats, not knowing the complexity of people.
I like those.
Yeah, no, it feels great to be like, oh, look at me. I don't want to wear shoes like that. It's like, it's like me judging people when I go out to a bar and seeing people drink. Well, I've been in recovery for 20 some odd years. It's like they haven't.
Yeah.
And not that I judge people when they drink or whatever, but I'm just saying, it's just easy to.
It's easy to judge people. Yeah.
It's so easy to judge people. And the reason it's easier to judge people than to think critically and to try to empathize and try to understand. So, and humans are humans, whether you're a pastor or a construction worker or a cook, or we're all human beings going through life and dealing with mental health and dealing with things that we don't even know our unconscious is doing to us and saying to us. And, often trying to fill a lack that's not there. And, my mom loved to shop, she loved to shop, but she didn't like expensive stuff. I mean, if you gave her a diamond ring, I'm sure she'd love it, but she liked to go to like, Target and TJ Maxx and always hunting for bargains, but she shopped a lot. And I felt like in a way she was kind of trying to fulfill something, that maybe was missing, but we all don't have great therapists in our life to point those things out to us. So
I mean,
I think we have to carry a lot of grace.
Yeah. I mean, I know I eat a lot of McDonald's because like McDonald's growing up for me was like a rarity.
Right.
I fully know
makes my
what
sugar
I'm doing,
circle.
But I still want to do it. Well, Jay, like you've been awesome here. I've been just like throwing things at you with like no regard for what we're going to talk about.
No, that's okay.
I want to talk a little bit about like your church and your work here for a couple minutes. But quickly tell us like the story of like Revolution Church, what it's about, why start a church, that kind of thing.
Revolution has just been my work for so long. Like I said, it started out before basically in an Assemblies of God church with me and a few friends wanting to start something that was basically a cooler alternative to normal Christianity. But it was kind of still like hip Christianity, but it was like, we're punks, we're hippies and skateboarders. But over time it evolved into a different message. And for me, grace really floored me. And the idea of grace was something that I wasn't raised with that message being taught. I saw it sometimes, but I wasn't really sure what it was. And I definitely didn't think it was from God. And so this idea of grace really floored me. So that's why I continued in it. I took some time off from Revolution, actually. I took about a year off. But when I started to understand grace, I felt like I needed to go back into the church, and I needed to tell people about it because I felt like it was lacking in the church. I felt like it was lacking from my experience with my parents and their fall, and not seeing people do restoration, or people talk about restoration, but I just never saw it in action.
Yeah.
And so I was like, if these gigantic televangelists screw up and their whole life is completely to the point where they lose everything, what's happening to the pastor, in North Virginia or whatever, or when they mess up, what are they doing? And then I started meeting a lot of those folks and realizing that, a lot of them have to go learn trades and do certain things like that. And that restoration wasn't something that was happening in people's lives, even on just a normal church attendance level. So the idea of grace really hit me hard, and I wanted to talk about it and tell people about it. And I knew I would get pushback. So I studied everything I could on the concept of grace, and not just like books about grace, but what grace meant in the Bible, what was the foundation of this message. Galatians is really a giant point for the ideas of grace, the book of Galatians. So, I just really took those things in and tried to create a place for people to come and hear about it. And mostly it was, Christians at the beginning and evangelicals and young people. But over the time people started coming who weren't involved in the church or didn't want to be involved in the church. And there was always this idea of, I think, friendship evangelism was something I heard a lot early on, and I liked the concept, but I felt like it was a bit dishonest. It was like friendship with an agenda.
Right.
And so for me, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to live my life as a pastor, and I'm going to pick a community. This was in Atlanta. I'm going to pick a community to be a part of. And I am going to build friendships, but I'm going to take out the evangelism part. I'm just going to be a part of a community. I'm not going to create a community. Revolution Church will not be a community. Revolution Church will be a part of a community. And that was the idea, was to just do that. And for quite a few years, that's what we did, was we were just a part of a community. We put on shows. They started, a lot of the shows, a lot of the venues started being shut down. So we would do bands. We would do just general market bands and Christian bands together. And that was interesting. And we would pack this place out and have shows. And I would actually ask the Christian bands not to preach. And a lot of times they would be really mad at me for it. But I was just like, I'm like, we're here to have fun and hang out and be a community. And, if they want to hear preaching, we give them a chance to come to service. That's what we're doing. Right now we're just trying to provide a place where people could come and hang out and not fight and not lose another spot. So those were some of the ideas of why to do that, and how we could just better serve our community in a way that was loving and graceful and show a different type of Christian. Basically, is like, this is just, at least let people have a better idea of what Christianity could be. And if they were drawn to that, great. If they weren't, that was okay too. And that's kind of been the main idea for the past years, is just, and as my theology has completely evolved and changed over time, but still that concept of just, that's why we meet in a bar, or, we meet in places like that now. And it's just, finding common ground and finding a common area where we could all come together, and you don't have to believe a certain thing. You don't have to think a certain thing. You don't have to be a certain political party. It's, everyone is welcome. And usually everyone is affirmed, so that's the other thing is different, I think, than most places. So, and as far as the question of why to start a church,
Mm-hmm.
I could give you a lot of reasons why not to start a church.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I mean, I've had, you know, I was doing it as long as I've done, and I've seen the ins and outs and the ups and downs, and it's a very extremely hard job. It's human beings are messy.
Mm-hmm.
People die, people get angry,
Mm-hmm.
people move on. You know, also you have build a lot of beautiful relationships and things like that as well. I mean, there's a lot of great to it as well, but for me right now is, you know, we have a community with the idea of hoping to help people grow in grace and think more, think deeply, and to help people think more critically is kind of what the goal is for Revolution right now, is to let people know that, you know, it's okay to have questions, it's okay to have doubts. And part of that is making sure that we're thinking through those things.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the majority of our community is online. So like me talking to you right now is, well, I mean, because of COVID is how I'm talking to everybody.
Right.
But also that's the majority of our congregation is online. So when we, you know, we do another podcast called Meet Your Congregation, where we actually interview people from all over the world about why they attend Revolution and what they're doing with their lives and what's going on. So the community can kind of get to know each other.
That's great.
You know, but for me, having had a lot of success and having had very little success, I don't feel as driven by success. I'm not driven by finances.
Yeah.
I'm driven by the fact that this is my passion and my heart and my art as well. So, you know, I have to make sacrifices in order to do what I do, but I do what I love. And so it's worth the sacrifices that I make in order to be able to do this work.
That's good. Has that, you mentioned grace and kind of doubting or the ability to think it, because I was going to ask you, like, what are these things that are connecting people to your church? And I think about some of my audience here is kind of mainline churches who are trying to lean into that progressive evangelical sphere and trying to attract some of those ex-evangelicals and also like progressive churches. What do you think? I mean, what would be your advice for churches in that sphere to, like, is there a way to reach those ex-evangelicals with a message of grace and, you know, freedom to doubt and to think? Or like, do you think they just still need to just, you know, they want to be left alone, if that makes sense? Like they've been harassed enough by church.
I think the thing is how can you be transparent with what you believe and what you struggle with, and how can you bring that transparency to the table? And if, you know, people are attracted to that, great. You know, like, what are you following your heart? You know, I mean, different churches do different things and provide different stuff. You know, like some have like really great worship, some have really great outreach stuff, some have some really great LGBTQ work. You know, is following what your convictions are, what your passions are, and hopefully, like, if you do that, people will be attracted to what you're doing. Yeah, you know. And for me, I think the mistake that the evangelical church has made in the past, like even with the emergent church, when I was a part of the emergent church for a long time, you know, there was a time where we were all getting these big gigs and getting invited to speak at these huge things, but it was the idea of, they thought that we had some sort of system to draw people in. Yeah. You know, like, oh, well, if we do couches instead of chairs and we sit in a circle instead of facing forward, you know, like they thought that this was the magic part of it. And it's like, well, no, those were just kind of things that came along with the fact that we all had questions that might not be answerable, or that we were looking for. And we just were uncomfortable with the hierarchy structure of the church. And so we just tried to get rid of that. And, you know, because I remember going to some church, speaking at some churches, and like, oh yeah, we've got this great worship band. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, like, it's cool that these people come. Oh, they don't come to the church. We actually hire them to come in. And then finding out the guy who's like, we worship you, we love you, Jesus, it's not even a Christian. Right. You know what I mean? And it's kind of putting on a show just to bring people in. And I'm just like, this seems a little bit strange to me. Yeah. you know, to even ask somebody to do that, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be like, hey, listen, can you come in and pretend to worship Jesus so we can get some people to come in? You know, so it's always like this, what's the new thing? What can we do to get people, get people to come in and think we're hip? You know, I mean, I think that might be some of the preachers and sneakers thing. Is they're like, well, man, if people think I look cool, they'll want to come and hang out with someone. Like, you can be cool and be a Christian, you know? And that's, you know, I think you can be cool and be a Christian, but you've also got to, you know, realize is that there's, you know, I think we're not always very clear on certain things of what Christianity is and isn't. And we're not very clear about what dying to self is and picking up your cross and what loving your enemy actually looks like. I mean, those is where the rubber hits the road, you know? And if having a pair of Jordans on helps you love your enemy better, man, get every color. Matter of fact, send me a pair of Jordans, because if that helps, I can use it.
Love it.
You know, and my enemy is going to be like, hey, man, I thought you were a jerk, but I saw those Jordans. And I'm like, all right, buddy, let's have a conversation, you know? But yeah, no, I mean, I just think there's this idea that there's like, what can we do to hook people in? And I think what you can do is you can embrace your contradictions, embrace your faults, embrace your humanity, and love people to the best of your ability. And I think you can maybe draw people in that way. You know, I mean, yeah, you have to sell yourself a little bit here and there, but you know, it's like everybody's got a podcast, do a podcast, do a few certain things. And if people like what you have, good on you, you know, but if you're realizing that you're having to manipulate people to come or manipulate people to give, I think then it's time to go like, you know, what's my goal here? Is my goal to have a big community of people?
Right.
Or is my goal here to help people work out life's issues, you know, life's problems and stuff like that? So I don't know. I don't really have the answers. I would definitely never write a book on church growth. You know, I always said that revolution is unorganized religion, just because we're not very good at organization. And in some ways, nor would we want to be, but in other ways, we really would like to be. You know, I mean, have some things that are a little bit more organized.
Well, great. Let's take a break real quick, and we'll come back for some closing questions. All right, we're back with Jay Bakker, and we'll skip the Pope for Day question. You kind of answered that.
Okay.
Do you have a theologian or Christian figure you'd want to like bring back to life or meet?
Martin Luther King Jr. I would love to sit down and speak with him for a little bit. I you know, this past week or two, you know, I got to the point where I just didn't want, I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, I had, you know, with the Jerry Falwell Jr. scandal, you know, coming up here in August, and you know, I have people comparing my dad and their fall to this fall, and which is bizarre. And I had some people say some really old accusations and old gossip, and took it for the rule, or that it was facts because they read it in the newspaper or read it in Wikipedia, and for me it was kind of hurtful. Especially because some of those folks are people I know and are friends with and are my contemporaries. And, you know, and then I follow Bernice King on Twitter, and I just went over to her Twitter and just read some stuff that she had written, and then some stuff about her dad and about Dr. King. And I mean, the man was just so capable of loving his enemies. And putting himself within danger, and not demanding his own way in order to talk to those who literally were killing and lynching his brothers and sisters and trying to kill him, and eventually did take his life. And when I look at someone like Dr. King, I feel like I see Christ embodied. You know, King was a human, right, and had faults like anybody else, and but his ability to do his work and do the work he did and carried on for 30 some odd years of his life, keeps me in check and reminds me that it's possible to, I could never reach that level, but it's work that's worth it. Mm-hmm. And not having to go in and say, well, this didn't happen or that didn't happen. I mean, trying to not, I maybe did a little bit of that, but, trying not to do that and just love people and realize that there's a bigger picture. So I think, I think Martin Luther King Jr. has provided us with the best roadmap on how to follow Christ through his work. And I think that would be for me and he was also brilliant and he loved theology.
Right.
And he loved Paul Tillich and I love Paul Tillich. And, so I would get a chance to chat with him about that as well. And
I want to point out your grounded being quote here earlier on. So,
oh yeah,
I love that. Paul Tillich was brilliant. Thinking about, we find ourselves in such a time of disruption to the world, to our nation, like we talked about, to the church. Any sense, like what people remember us for, or conversely, like what church will look like, Christianity will look like in hundreds of years later down the road?
Unfortunately, I think a lot of people think of Christianity and they think of hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not all of the church's fault for that. But the fact that we often rejoice when this type of hypocrisy comes out, especially if it's someone not in our
team.
Not in our team, I think we add to that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if everybody just in the church, every time they saw someone make a mistake, we all ran to help that person and help that community.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some sort of organization set up to do that moved outside of denominational walls. How cool would that be? But I think, we'll be remembered for things like that. I'm sure my family played a part in that as well. But that seems to be what people focus on. We focus on these moments of failure and hypocrisy, and we miss out on probably the majority of the stuff that was good. So a lot of the good stuff that happened, or we become blind to the bad theology, because of it too. So it's like, to me, it's like, there's all things bad, but there's also a ton of people in a school they get fined if they spend the night with someone of the same sex, or if they do something wrong. It's like, maybe we need to be looking at things like this as well. So, what will the church look like in a few hundred years? I have no idea. I feel like hopefully will still be around.
Uh-huh.
But I think it will look different.
Yeah.
I think it will look completely different. It's already looks different now, just because of what COVID's done.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting. Best of luck to you if you're listening in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jay, where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, then go to revolutionchurch.com, which needs a bit of an updating, but then go there. All our podcasts are free online anywhere you listen to podcasts, which is Revolution Church.
Mm-hmm.
It's an R with wing logo, because I'm sure we're not the only one that's called Revolution Church.
Yeah.
So that's available. I'm on Twitter is Jay Bakker, 2 Ks in my name. Also on Instagram and also on Facebook. I do a lot of stuff in those places as well and talk about a lot of stuff. Hopefully I'll be speaking more in the future when the world, if the world ever gets back to normal.
Yeah.
So they can find me in those places. And I have a few books out that you can find in different places. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's great getting a chance to talk to you. So
my pleasure.
I always leave people with a word of peace. So peace be with you.
Also with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Loren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. But hey, before you go, do us a favor, subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.